thank you," the woman said after the wanderer had done her the favor of drawing the curtains. "I am starting to believe I like to get used to the comfort of having a pair of seeing eyes," she added with a smile. For dinner they had roast potatoes sliced, with meat to go with them, which she had bought in Aileron today in exchange for some of her harvest. It gnawed at his chest that he had not accompanied her. What if something happened to her again? He narrowed his eyes. There it was anew. Those thoughts. While they ate, they were silent. Only the woman had been heard earlier thanking Thorin for the meal, the house, the company, and the rescue that had gone before. He would have expected her to tie him to a stake and at least set him on fire a little, because he did not join in the prayer, but she showed, as in so many things, a surprising amount of understanding. So much so, of course, that he couldn't help but notice how his heart felt drawn to her. "You have nothing to be ashamed of," he heard her say all at once. Perplexed, he shook his head. "For what?" "I assumed you were worried about me going to Aileron alone. Am I wrong?" "No, I'm concerned about that too." "You told me once in the days that you have enough scars on your body. People have done bad things to you." "Some of them I may have deserved." "I think you can always talk about everything. Isn't violence always found where words fail you? And for an agonizingly long time?" He sighed. "I didn't mean to open old wounds for you." She reached for his hand and he made sure it was his right. "It's just that I wish you could see the good side in people too. I have seen how excellent you can fight, but have you ever wondered what would happen if you vanquished everyone with those skills?" He smirked wearily. "I am not that violent." "I only mean that in theory." He noticed at the word, for it was not one he usually heard the peasants use. "If you were to vanquish all humans, all there is on Nikat is ill. Would you be freer? Happier?" He bowed his head. "I don't know." "Ask me." He looked at her in wonder. Her eyes, if that could be said of a blind woman, reflected determination. "All right. What would I be then?" "The ruler of emptiness and nothingness. At the latest then, however, reality catches up with you that this, in fact, rules you." Now she went even further and put her hand on his chest. "This rules you." He was amazed at how little he could help himself right now. He could not break away from her touch, and there were no words on the tip of his tongue. Now she took his right hand in hers and squeezed it tightly. "I know the world can be a horrible place, and a few days ago I no longer heard this exclusively, but experienced it firsthand. People are horrible. There's a lot evil in them. You radiate it. Don't get me wrong. What they did to you sticks to you. I strongly suspect that these scars do not make you look friendly, although you can hardly help it." She stroked the back of his hand and continued. "But don't you think you could do some good with your skills, simple wanderer? Perhaps Thorin gave you this gift to do something about all this. Not win the war, if you will, but at least create an area for like-minded or similar-minded people who lack the strength you possess, which you have gained through the battles." He swallowed. A lump had formed in his throat. "Honestly, I don't know what to say to that." "Then perhaps it is simply a time of allowing things to take effect, rather than acting upon them. Like a plant that is watered, has its water now, and simply needs time to grow." And with that, she got up and set about clearing the table. There were clanks and clatters as she washed dishes, and the wanderer didn't know which to be more impressed with. That she managed it all so enormously well as a blind person, because he knew that if he tried to do that, everything would have gone to pieces. Or how about her choice of words? He had never met anyone like her before. Is it alright if I go out for some fresh air for a moment?" She laughed. "You are a big man, aren't you? Surely you can decide that for yourself." "Yes." He took a few steps backwards before turning and walking out the door. By now the 3 moons had risen and the sun had disappeared. He had walked along part of the path the boy had chosen. Assar was with him, but once again he found that he did not need to hold the reins for the animal to accompany him. The wanderer almost expected the boy to jump out of a bush here somewhere, that he wouldn't have wandered too far from home, and if he didn't want to show himself, perhaps pinched something from their supplies now and then. He didn't spot any fire either, though. He could not see far, but the smoke would certainly have been noticeable from some distance away. That the boy knew something about smokeless fires. He could only remember explaining it to Billy, but to him. Either that, or he could do without a fire. He didn't perish, hopefully, he ended the thought. Before those about the woman caught up with him again. She was pretty, he thought to himself. That blonde hair, and those blue eyes. Sure, that was something he had read about in many books. Such women were always the princesses, the good guys, and so on and so forth. But in his story, yes, he could well imagine that she fitted his story. That she fitted him. It triggered something in him, something special. He slapped his forehead. What am I doing here? He asked himself and looked at his hand. He heard a soft snort. Well, you seem to be having a wonderful time with her anyway, don't you? The animal pawed at his spot. So you think we should stay with her? He asked further. It snorted once more. Don't you think that will rust us? Whinnying, it shook its head. Yes, we could still go for a walk or ride. His gaze started to wander. Right together. Right together. He weighed his head and didn't even notice how he looked up at the moons and thought. And then he had that feeling in his chest. He couldn't describe it at first. Something drew him back to the house, but it wasn't an urge like it was on fire. Was it what people called homesickness? Another week had passed. Right now, the Wanderer was helping with the field work outside. It was an amazingly good feeling to be needed by someone. He would have actually thought to feel taken advantage of, but the woman's kindness completely made up for it. There were many small gestures, for example, that she came to him just to dab the sweat from his face, or that she brought out a cup of juice for him to drink. He had never drunk anything so delicious. It was strawberries cut small and mixed with water. The latter was actually exclusively what he drank all his life, and not infrequently from puddles. In the evening they sat together. Beforehand, the Wanderer had helped her to cut down a tree to add some more firewood. From the rest he had made a bench, albeit a rustic one, which they placed outside the kitchen window by the house. It did occur to him at one point that she must be relatively wealthy, for glass, as he knew, was an expensive commodity, but that dissipated into the end of his imagination, that perhaps she had escaped the aristocracy. Sooner or later he would ask her anyway, or she would tell of her own accord. He was sure of that. For now, it was fully enough to sit here with her and gaze at the stars together. He was still a little uncomfortable with the closeness, but the fact that she often took the initiative made it easier for him each time. He admired her courage. She had leaned against his side with the head on his shoulder. Perhaps the blind eyes helped to venture closer to a black wolf. Isn't it amazing what Thorin has managed to do? She asked him, running her hand slowly through the air as if she could catch one of the stars. There is magic, and this is it. He would have liked to bite his tongue now. On one hand, because he wondered how a blind person could grasp that. On the other hand, didn't she realize that the king wanted to destroy everything magical? This would certainly include such idioms and sentiments. Before he could say anything, however, she took his arm and snuggled even closer. I am truly grateful to you, she whispered, her eyes closed. How quickly life can change, can't it? For many years I walked in the surrounding woods without much harm coming to me. But then, not too many nights ago, it was one in which I was convinced by faith that this was the end of me. That these men... He felt her mood change and he hesitated. Finally, however, he put his right arm around her and confidently squeezed her shoulder with his hand. But then you came, and your friend, she continued now, smiling. Just a few minutes later, that belief from my end was gone, and now... She released one arm from his and sought his hand. Awkwardly, he disengaged his right arm from her and gave her that hand. She cradled her head, then she smirked. You still find it hard, don't you? When was he going to tell her the truth? She would eventually find out he was the Black Wolf. If he really stayed here, he clenched his left hand into a fist. There was no one but him and Akira who knew about the story behind his left arm. What happened back in Falcon's Reach Fortress when they confronted Asgard together. It's alright, she interrupted his train of thought, her thumb stroking the back of his hand. I know this will take time, but I'm willing to give it to you, you know. She smirked and shook her head in response. And if she hadn't said the following words now, the suspicion of being deceived somehow would have become a conviction in him after all. "Simple Wanderer," she began. "I understand that you had some kind of adventurous respect or code together with the boy, and maybe that's why you didn't tell each other's names." She put a hand on his chest, that she could feel his heart beating. For a while now he had not been wearing his armor, only the black shirt underneath, and he felt naked in a way. Perhaps, he thought, it was like a tortoise that one day had to live without a shell. "But don't you think it's time to tell me your name?" He knew she was right. She had done so much for him, and in the past 2 weeks they had grown much closer. He hadn't believed in God so much. Not that he didn't think they existed, he just didn't really think of them. But now that he had met and spent time with her, it was beginning to dawn on him. Perhaps there was someone up there after all, whether he was Thorin or called something else, but someone who brought them together. Someone who guided a few destinies here and there and led people accordingly to the harvest whose seeds they had sown. But then he thought of all the blood he had shed. "Please." Her voice brought him out of his thoughts again. It was sweet, something that managed to caress his soul in such a short time, probably the most cherished thing he possessed. He had already learned her name a few days ago. Leandra. Leandra. He repeated in mind. Whenever he heard that name now, all the beautiful memories were immediately linked to it. What an insane happiness this was, and could this really be just the beginning? After all these years of a draining dry spell, was luck now going to be with him? A man who rather preferred skill and ability because they were more reliable? "I know how it feels to have your specially created peaceful spot taken away from you," the Wanderer now spoke. A hand slipped a little from his chest. Just from this gesture, it was painfully clear to him that she really longed to know his name. "I've been thinking about something similar these days," she said wearily. "Why shouldn't it also be possible for two people who like each other and who have each had their peaceful spot taken away from them? Why shouldn't it be possible for them to create their own peaceful spot?" She noticed when he now reached for her hand and squeezed it. "Tyrox." Her eyes lit up with joy at that word. "Is that your name?" "Yep." It almost took his breath away. He was pretty sure that anyone else would have rejoiced immediately. For him, however, it was like she threw herself against his chest in such a way as if a blow had hit him first. But then he put his arms around her and his right hand on her head. Her hair was gentle and her body so soft, her touch shared warmth, and after so long of only feeling sword club or blows, those of a woman loving him were the promise of a whole other world. One in which everything seemed possible to him. More such evenings followed, and just a few days later they spoke to each other more personally, confessed their love and began sharing a bed. Not just to fall asleep together, but so that the first thing they saw at the beginning of each day was each other. But the black wolf was a hunted animal, one that had become sluggish through comfort, and thus did not notice that it was now being watched by an old enemy.